Hello students, I'm your facilitator for this course, EDU 321, Psychology of Learning. My name is Dorothy Ofoha. I'm a now staff in the Faculty of Education. This course, EDU 321, Psychology of Learning, is a 2-credit unit semester course. It is a core course for all students in teacher education program. It is also suitable as a course of study for anyone who wants to acquire some knowledge of psychology of learning. This course offers many important benefits for the teacher, for all of you. Do you want to have a taste of some of these benefits? Sit back and enjoy the first lesson of the course, which is on the concept of learning. Thank you. Yes, we are still talking psychology of learning. And the first lesson, which is on the concept of learning. Yeah, today is 22nd, 2020, and my name is Dorothy Ofoha. The topics to be covered in this course, let me just give you a brief summary of some of the topics we shall be covering. We shall be covering the concept of learning, like I said earlier. We shall be covering the factors affecting learning, theories of learning, Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning, Thorndike's theory of connectionism, Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, Bandura's social learning theory, cognitive field theory of learning, motivation in learning, transfer of learning, retention in learning, including memory, remembering, and forgetting. You can see it's a well-loaded course. Okay, we come to the first lesson for today, which is the concept of learning. When you think of learning, what comes to your mind? How would you describe learning? Have we ever thought about what goes on in the process of learning? In this lesson, we will define and clarify the concept of learning and discuss some of its attributes. We will look at the processes through which learning can take place and how an individual acquires learning. So, what are you going to be gaining from this lesson? After completing this lesson, you'll be able to define the concept of learning. You'll be able to explain the attributes of learning by pointing out what should and what should not be regarded as learning. You should also be able to discuss the 4 stages of the learning process. Yes, let's have a general overview of what is learning before we go into the nitty-gritty of the concept itself and try to break it down. Yes, learning is a psychological concept that cuts across psychology and education. You are learning as you are listening to this lecture. You are learning. Yes, you are learning. You are learning when you read your course materials. You are learning when you watch instructional videos. Learning is also involved in many other aspects of life. You learn to ride a bicycle, you learn to drive a car, you learn to play football, you learn to cook. You learn to cook, yes. Cooking also involves learning because it involves some skills you need to acquire. Also, learning is the most important concept psychologists study. And most of what we do or do not do is influenced by what we learn and how we have learned it. So we come to the real question now. What is learning? What is learning? To a layman, learning refers to knowing something. And to some, it is the process of acquiring knowledge. However, psychologists do not agree with the simplistic layman's view about learning. We need to have a clear understanding of what psychologists refer to as learning. From a psychological point of view, learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience or practice. I say that again. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience or practice. Note the key words in that definition: permanent, change, behavior, experience, practice. This definition, you might be wondering, how do you learn from experience? How do you learn from experience? Let's consider this scenario. While a child is approaching a burning matchstick, that child gets burnt and withdraws. The next time when the child faces a similar burning matchstick, the child will waste no time in withdrawing away from that burning matchstick. What has happened here in this case? The child learns to avoid not only the matchstick, but also all burning things. When this happens, we say the child has learned from experience. So that's an example of learning from experience. Okay, so the definition of learning we have given emphasizes 4 attributes. Emphasizes 4 attributes of learning. 1, learning involves change in behavior, be it good or be it bad behavior. It is learning. 2, the change in behavior must be relatively permanent. 3, only change in behavior acquired through experience or practice is considered learning. Only change in behavior acquired through experience or practice is considered learning. 4, learning is universal and continuous. In a way, it is a long life process. It is not confined to our schooling only. It is not restricted to the formal education system, the learning you acquire from formal education. So these are the attributes of learning. All these attributes are derived from that definition we gave you, and we asked you to note the key words. So the key words are explained in these attributes. So, haven't learned what is learning. Haven't learned what is learning. What is not considered learning? What types of behaviors will not be considered learning? What types of behaviors will not be considered learning? A change in behavior due to fatigue will not be considered learning. A change in behavior due to some drugs you have taken, you take some drugs and you are behaving in a funny way, that behavior, that even though it's a change in behavior, but that behavior is not considered as learning. Or the behavior or the change in behavior of a drunkard. The change in behavior of a drunkard who has taken some alcohol cannot be regarded as learning. Why do you think so? Why? Because that behavior is temporary. If the person gets himself or gets herself back to normal, that change will no longer occur, you will no longer see that change in behavior. So the change in behavior is just temporary, it's not permanent. Remember what we said about the definition of learning. It got to be permanent. So any change in behavior that is due to temporary reasons is not considered as learning. Also, learning does not include the changes in behavior on account of maturation. On account of maturation. For instance, when you say maturation, when somebody is maturing and behaving in a matured way relative to the age of development of that child, you can regard that change in behavior as learning. For instance, let's look at the stages of a child's development. When you see an infant begins to develop and begins to learn how to eat, then begins to learn how to sit, begins to learn how to crawl about, begins to learn how to stand and how to walk. Those changes are as a result of maturation. They are not as a result of learning. The child did not acquire learning in those instances. Those changes that occurs in the stages of that child's development are due to maturation. So you do not regard them as arising from learning. So let me ask you, would you consider those changes that occur in the stages of a child's development, that is being able to eat, sit, crawl, stand, walk, run, and speak, as learning? Your guess is as good as mine. No, they are not learning. Those behaviors occur as a result of maturation. So you can't regard them as learning. Okay. So that is it on the concept of learning. Now we will discuss the processes through which learning can take place, how an individual acquires learning. When learning something new, for instance, you are learning a skill, you are learning, trying to acquire knowledge or trying to acquire some good behaviors, there are 4 phases that we move through. Although the speed at which we pass through each phase may vary, but we always go through each of these phases. What are these phases? Number 1 is sensation or acquisition. It's at this stage you are acquiring and receiving messages from the environment to the brain. You are acquiring the messages from the information from the environment to the brain. The second stage is perception. This is the process of organizing and interpreting information received from the environment. Then the third stage is the association or practice stage. At this stage, you are integrating the new knowledge or skills you have acquired to your repertoire, to previous experience that is in your repertoire, in your brain already. So the last stage of the learning process is the application. That is, at this stage, you are applying the new knowledge or skills to solve problems in actual life situation. These are the 4 stages that one goes through in the process of learning a new skill or knowledge. Acknowledging and understanding the stages of the learning process can help you, the teacher, become a better educator. In summary, we have learned the concept of learning and its attributes. We also discussed the processes through which learning can take place. I do hope you enjoyed the lesson for today. Next lesson, we shall be looking at the factors affecting learning. So it's goodbye for now. And this is my email address, dorothyofoha@gmail.com. Thank you.